Welcome to this video on disaster recovery testing. Once the disaster recovery plan has been built and it's ready, we now need to test it to verify that it's going to be effective. Now, if you recall from previous video, disaster recovery is ensuring that critical business assets and processes remain operational in the event of disruption or a disaster. Business continuity focus on the critical business functions. Disaster recovery focus on the technology side of things. So we need those technology assets to support those critical business functions. And that's where we split the difference between BCP and DRP. Now the most important document you need to know for the CISSP exam is the NIST Special Publication 884. This is the guide test, training and exercise program for IT plan and capabilities. And within this document, there are two specific tests or exercise that you need to be familiar with. The first thing, a tabletop exercise. This is where we discuss personal roles, personal responsibility and responses to disaster situations. The other being a functional exercise, which is gonna validate the operational readiness by simulating disaster recovery effort. So we have tabletop exercise, then we have functional, and we need to know both for the exam. So the first tabletop exercise you need to know is the read through test. This is basically first test that you will do as part of the disaster recovery testing. This is also called checklist test because what we are going to do is read through the disaster recovery plan and comprehend all of the disaster recovery information so that we understand the roles, responsibility and the processes. And we are gonna review and update the DRP based on the subject matter expertise or our understanding of our role or our responsibility. Okay. The idea here is that we send the DRP to all of the disaster recovery team members, and this will allow them to read through everything. Red line meaning provide update or ask question or whatever they want to do, and then eventually they will agree, okay, this is my role and this is my responsibility and I understand the processes, similar to what we discussed in the previous video. So this is thorough review of disaster recovery plan that help us find error, omission, things and left out. Other requirements that we are not considered and things like that, and this gives us a chance to update all those things before we moved into the next test, which is going to be walkthrough test, because it's a structure meeting where we meet and rehearsal disaster recovery procedure. This is something is referred to as tabletop exercise. This referred to how everyone gathers together and set everything on a conference table. And essentially we walk through the entire DRP. So really what we are doing is we are walking through the different scenarios, the different procedures and activities, location and mode. This is going to allow us to understand the coordination that required throughout the different scenarios, because if our facility were to be hit by natural disaster, say a typhoon or a hurricane, it is not the same response as if we were hit with an earthquake. We are not gonna respond the same way, right? Because flooding and building falling apart are two different things. So this will allow us to walk through those scenarios: fire, floods, man-made disasters such as cyber attacks or even terrorism, things like that. And now we can actually say, well, these are the procedure. Well, what about this? Should not we call emergency service first? Then communicate with senior management. It helps us iron those things out. Then we would take things up a level and perform a simulation test. This is where we actually physically simulate or role play possible disaster scenarios under realistic condition. So what we are going to do here is we are going to activate various systems. We are gonna perform evacuation drills. We are gonna simulate data recovery and more. This is also called preparedness test. So really what we are trying to evaluate here is how ready or prepared are we for the disaster or strike. So we could be testing certain things, we could be activating certain things, we could be performing fire alarm drills, evacuation drills and so on. The most important thing to understand about a simulation test is it doesn't activate, it does not involve relocation of any kind. So we are not moving to recovery site or a backup location. We are gonna do everything on-prem or at the local facility. The idea here is to provide some realistic feel by increasing stress level, having people touch things, pressing alarm button, turning switch on and off, making some simulated phone calls, think like that. It gives you the most realistic field that you can find without actually engaging the rest of the personnel within the facility. So this provides a realistic field without really impacting the rest of the personnel within the organization. Then the next level up would be to perform what we call parallel test. This is gonna activate the recovery side using disaster recovery procedure. So now you can see that we were doing everything on-prem as part of the simulation test. Now we are actually going to activate our recovery sites and see if that will eventually work or not. The primary site is going to maintain full day-to-day business operation. So we are not going to impact that primary location by performing the parallel test. Basically, what we are going to do is get a live opportunity to execute the actual DRP at the recovery site, and we are not going to impact the primary site in any way. And this is going to add a lot more stress. There's gonna be actual execution steps where we are spinning things up, provisioning on and off or deprovisioning. We are gonna be moving data, maybe testing data backups, those kind of things. This is going to give the DR personnel, the disaster recovery team, the real experience and executing the disaster recovery plan. So this test can also involve any external services. We can actually engage emergency services if we want to, or third-party services, managed service provider, cloud service provider, whoever it might be. And we can also test our service level agreement with them and so on. There's a lot of thing we can do here at the parallel test. The final test you need to know is the full interruption test, and it is just like it sounds. We are gonna interrupt everything, we are gonna simulate the disaster, and we are gonna actually execute the simulated disaster and migrate primary business operation to the recovery site location. Now this is to be conducted after all of the other tests have been successful and proven to work, and then we have to get full authorization from the senior management before we do this. So something to note here for the exam: none of the other tests we have talked about here should impact or disrupt production or operation in any way. This is by design. We want to test everything as far as we possibly can without impacting our business or impacting production. This is when we would actually impact those, because now everything is fully tested, it's been fully vetted, it's fully proven to be effective. This is where we take that step in a huge risk to execute the test. Now this is gonna shut down primary operation, it's gonna shut down a portion of operation if you wanna just kind of simulate a small full interruption test, but basically it's gonna have significant impact on the business. So this is why we need authorization, senior management gotta be involved and so on. So this requires a lot of planning, lot of coordination and lot of training to make sure that it is gonna be successful. Now normally when we do this full interruption test, this is normally gonna be off hours. It may be over a weekend, it may be during night time, it may be just any time that your production and operation is pretty low. This is the time where you want to execute this test. So if that means that folks are coming in, at night time, staying overnight to work at a night shift to do this, which I have done in my career also, this is when you would do that. You would not want to do this as a peak operational hours for your organization. You would want to do this where it would be minimal impact if something went wrong. So those are the tests you need to know for the exam. Now naturally, once we have executed this test, we are going to find things that are gonna be wrong, right? The BCP and the DRP, the business continuity plan and the disaster recovery plan are both living, breathing documents, right? They are subject to change at any time based on changes in the business, based on changes in the risk or threats and so on. So what this gives an opportunity to do is ensure that the business continuity plan and the disaster recovery plan are in sync together. There no sense in us restoring assets that don't support those critical business function, right? So we want to make sure that we are targeting the right server, the right networks, the right workstation, or right whatever application and database and what you have. We want to make sure that we are targeting those right things in the disaster recovery plan that's going to support the business continuity. And based on this, we want to redline this document, update this document, and then put them through the configuration management process. So we want to manage the control this document through the CM process, and any changes in how we execute processes if organization personnel change, such as a disaster recovery team member leaves the organization and industry regulation changes, and it's a lot of other factors should require a review of both of this plan. So this should be part of your continuous monitoring strategy, where if you have change in process, a change in personnel, a change in regulation, any kind of change is gonna trigger the review of BCP and DRP just to make sure that everything is still accurate. So the bottom line for this video is to understand each of the disaster recovery tests and know that only the full interruption test will impact the production or operation. None of the other tests should impact production or operation.